You think Christmas in poor households meant going without? Think again. Working-class families across America created some of the most inventive and deeply satisfying holiday meals from ingredients that cost almost nothing. Let's dig into 30 poor man Christmas meals no one makes anymore. Mock turkey was the centerpiece of Christmas tables where real poultry remained beyond reach, a testament to ingenuity born from necessity. Families took cheaper cuts of pork shoulder or veal, seasoned them heavily with sage, thyme, and onion, then shaped the meat into a rough bird form before roasting slowly in wood-fired ovens. The drippings became rich gravy that masked any difference from the real thing. Some households created elaborate molds from bread stuffing packed around the meat to mimic drumsticks and wings. Children rarely knew the difference. The mock turkey tradition stretched back to the Depression when a real bird could cost a full week's wages. By shaping humble ingredients with care, mothers transformed scarcity into celebration. The meal represented more than food. It was proof that love and creativity could make Christmas feel complete even when money couldn't. Today, mock turkey has vanished, but it once carried the weight of family pride. Suet pudding was the dense Christmas dessert that sustained working families through the coldest months when calories meant survival. Made from beef suet, the hard fat surrounding kidneys, mixed with flour, breadcrumbs, dried fruit, and spices, then wrapped in cloth and boiled for hours, this pudding emerged dark, moist, and impossibly satisfying. The sweet melted during cooking, creating pockets of richness that made each bite feel luxurious despite costing almost nothing. Families obtained suet free from butchers who considered it waste, turning discarded fat into the highlight of Christmas dinner. Served with hard sauce or simple syrup, suet pudding delivered the sweetness and density that cold December nights demanded. Children anticipated it all year, knowing Christmas meant this special treat would appear. The tradition connected families to English and Irish ancestors who brought the recipe across the ocean. Though nearly disappeared from American tables, suet pudding once represented the heart of a poor man's Christmas. Bread pudding with hard sauce transformed stale bread, something most families had in abundance, into Christmas dessert that rivaled anything from a bakery window. Day-old bread was torn into chunks, soaked in milk and eggs, sweetened with sugar or molasses, then spiced with cinnamon and nutmeg before baking until golden. The magic happened when hard sauce was poured over warm pudding. Butter creamed with powdered sugar and flavored with vanilla or whiskey, melting into rivers of sweetness. Nothing was wasted. Bread that would otherwise go to chickens became celebration. Families added raisins or dried apples when available, stretching the dessert while adding bursts of sweetness. The pudding served as both dessert and breakfast the following day, continuing holiday spirit through Boxing Day. For working-class households, bread pudding proved Christmas didn't require expensive ingredients, just patience, creativity, and wisdom to transform ordinary pantry items into something extraordinary. Crackling cornbread brought the taste of hog-killing season directly to the Christmas table. Golden, crispy bread studded with rendered pork cracklings that added richness to every bite. When families butchered their yearly hog in late fall, skin and fat were rendered down, leaving behind crispy bits called cracklings that were stirred into cornbread batter. The bread baked in cast-iron skillets preheated with lard until smoking hot, creating a crust that shattered between teeth. Cracklings provided bursts of salty, porky flavor throughout, turning simple cornmeal into something approaching luxury. This bread accompanied every Christmas dish, sopping up pot liquor from greens, crumbling into bean soup, or eaten alone with butter and sorghum. For rural families who raised hogs, crackling cornbread represented full-circle self-sufficiency. Nothing from the pig went to waste. The bread kept for days and could be reheated to restore crispness. Though rarely made today, crackling cornbread once announced Christmas had arrived. Oxtail soup was the Christmas Eve tradition that turned the cheapest cut at the butcher shop into liquid gold simmered with patience and care. Oxtails, bony, cartilage-rich tails that most customers overlooked, were browned until deeply caramelized, then covered with water and simmered for hours with onions, carrots, turnips, and whatever root vegetables the seller provided. As collagen broke down, the broth became silky and rich, the meat falling from bones into tender shreds that dissolved on the tongue. The soup required time rather than money, making it perfect for families where labor was plentiful, but cash was scarce. A single pot could feed 8 or 10 people, stretched further with potatoes or barley. Served in deep bowls with thick bread for sopping, oxtail soup warmed bodies and spirits on the coldest night of the year. Though oxtails now appear on upscale menus, they once belonged to the poor, proof that the best flavors often come from what others discard. Boiled fruitcake was the Christmas dessert that required no oven, a practical solution for families whose wood supply couldn't spare fuel for baking. The batter combined flour, suet, molasses, dried fruit, and spices into a dense mixture wrapped tightly in cheesecloth and lowered into boiling water. Hours of simmering produced a dark, moist cake even denser than its baked cousin. Steam cooking preserved every bit of moisture, creating texture almost sticky with sweetness. Families without proper ovens could still produce Christmas cake using nothing but a large pot and patience. The boiled fruitcake improved with age, wrapped in cloth soaked with brandy or cider if available, or stored in cool cellars where it kept for weeks. Sliced thin and served with coffee, it provided sweetness lasting through the entire holiday season. This forgotten method proved celebration didn't require fancy equipment, just knowledge passed down from generations who understood how to create abundance from almost nothing. Salt pork and milk gravy was the Christmas morning breakfast that fortified working families before a long day of visiting and celebration. Thick slices of salt-cured pork belly were fried slowly in cast iron until edges crisped and fat rendered into the pan. That rendered fat became gravy's foundation, flour whisked in until golden, then milk added slowly while stirring until it thickened into creamy white sauce flecked with crispy pork bits. Poured over hot biscuits fresh from the oven, the combination delivered salt, fat, and satisfaction in every bite. Salt pork cost a fraction of bacon and could be preserved without refrigeration for months, making it essential for families living far from towns. The gravy stretched small amounts of meat to feed large families, each biscuit becoming a vessel for rich sauce. Children remembered this as the taste of Christmas morning, frying pork mingling with wood smoke and anticipation. Though rarely served today, salt pork gravy meant Christmas began with abundance. Stewed dried fruit compote was the Christmas side dish that brought summer's sweetness to winter's darkest days. Jewel-colored fruits swimming in spiced syrup. Families preserved summer fruit by drying it near wood stoves, creating stores of apples, peaches, apricots, and prunes lasting until spring. For Christmas, dried fruit was covered with water, sweetened with sugar or honey, and simmered with cinnamon and cloves until fruit plumped in fragrant syrup. The compote served as both side dish and dessert, spooned alongside roasted meat or poured over pound cake. Preparation required starting days ahead, allowing fruit to rehydrate and absorb spices. Children received small bowls as treats between meals, sticky sweet fruit providing rare sugar when sweets were precious. The compote represented planning and preservation. Families who thought ahead enjoyed sunshine's taste when snow covered the ground. This tradition connected Christmas to harvest months, reminding everyone that celebration required year-round preparation. Bean soup. Christmas dinner was the honest meal served in households where pretense mattered less than nutrition. A steaming pot of pinto or navy beans simmered all day with whatever pork was available. Beans cost pennies per pound and stored indefinitely, making them survival's foundation for working families. For Christmas, the pot received special attention. A ham hock saved from fall, extra onions, perhaps vinegar for brightness. The soup simmered from morning until evening, filling the house with savory aroma, announcing celebration as clearly as any turkey. Served with cornbread and pickled vegetables, bean soup provided complete protein and deep satisfaction. Children didn't feel deprived. They felt fed, warm, and loved. The soup stretched to accommodate unexpected guests by adding water and bread. What made bean soup remarkable as Christmas dinner was its honesty. Families understood celebration lived in togetherness, not expense. The meal represented dignity, choosing nutrition over pretense when money wouldn't stretch. Cornmeal mush with molasses was the Christmas breakfast sustaining families when even flour became too expensive. Hot porridge filling bellies and warming spirits. Coarse cornmeal was stirred slowly into boiling water, cooking until it thickened into smooth, golden mass clinging to the spoon. The key was patience. Rushing produced lumps, while slow stirring created silk. Served in deep bowls with thick ribbons of blackstrap molasses pooled on top, the mush provided carbohydrates and iron fueling celebration. Some families added milk when available, creating creamier texture children loved. Leftover mush was poured into pans to set overnight, then sliced and fried next morning until crispy outside and creamy within. This meant one pot of cornmeal provided both dinner and breakfast, ultimate economy. Molasses was cheaper than sugar and provided minerals refined sweetness couldn't match. Together, cornmeal and molasses represented survival cooking's foundation, ingredients so basic yet satisfying that families survived winter on little else. Potato soup. Christmas dinner was the meal proving celebration didn't require meat, just patience, potatoes, and love stirred into every bowl. Families diced whatever potatoes the seller provided, simmering them with onions until they broke down into thick, starchy broth. A splash of milk, when available, transformed the soup into something almost luxurious. Salt, pepper, and perhaps a bay leaf provided seasoning, while fatback or butter added richness stretching across the entire pot. The soup could feed a dozen people for pennies, perfect for large families or unexpected guests. Children didn't consider this poverty food. They considered it comfort. Warm bowls steaming in their hands while snow fell outside. Some families added crumbled bacon on top for Christmas, elevating everyday soup into holiday fare. Potato soup represented survival cooking's baseline. When there was nothing else, there were always potatoes. Though simple, it carried families through the hardest winters with dignity intact. Fried salt herring was the Christmas Eve tradition brought by Scandinavian and Northern European immigrants who settled in working-class neighborhoods across America. Whole salt-preserved herring were soaked overnight to remove brine, then dredged in flour and fried in butter until skin crisped and flesh turned flaky. The fish was served with boiled potatoes and pickled beets, creating a meal both festive and affordable. Salt herring cost almost nothing. Preserved fish was working people's protein, available when fresh fish wasn't. The tradition connected families to old country customs where herring signified abundance for the coming year. Children grew up associating the distinctive aroma with Christmas anticipation. The meal required starting the night before, soaking fish while the household slept, making preparation part of the ritual. Though the tradition has faded as preserved fish disappeared from American tables, salt herring once meant Christmas had truly arrived for immigrant families. Neckbones and rice was the Christmas dinner, transforming the cheapest cut at the butcher counter into a meal worth celebrating. Pork neckbones, bony, tough, largely ignored by wealthier customers, were browned in a heavy pot, then covered with water, and simmered until meat softened and collagen melted into silky gravy. The bones were served over mounds of rice, soaking up every drop of precious liquid. Onions, garlic, and whatever seasonings the pantry provided added depth. For African American families throughout the South, neckbones represented both necessity and tradition, making the most of what little money could buy while creating something genuinely delicious. The meat required patience, rewarding those who waited with fork-tender protein falling from bone. Children learned to navigate around small bones, finding every scrap. Though dismissed as poverty food, neckbones and rice carried pride, proof that skill could transform the least desirable cuts into celebration. Vinegar pie was the Christmas dessert emerging when lemons were impossible luxuries and families still craved something tangy and sweet. The filling was almost absurdly simple: sugar, eggs, butter, flour, and apple cider vinegar whisked together and poured into a pastry shell. During baking, the mixture transformed into custard with surprising depth, vinegar providing brightness mimicking citrus without the expense. The pie cost nearly nothing, using ingredients every household already stocked. For families who couldn't afford fruit pies, vinegar pie offered dignity. a proper dessert looking and tasting special despite humble origins. Some recipes added vanilla or nutmeg for warmth, but the classic version let sweet-tart balance speak for itself. Children often preferred it to fancier options, not knowing they were eating scarcity's product. Vinegar pie appeared at church socials and Christmas tables throughout Appalachia and the rural South, proof that necessity could birth genuine deliciousness. Persimmon pudding was the Christmas dessert coming directly from the land. Wild fruit gathered in late fall and transformed into dense, spiced pudding unlike anything store-bought. Wild persimmons had to be gathered after the first hard frost, when astringent flesh finally sweetened into honeyed richness. Families pressed ripe fruit through colanders to remove seeds, then mixed pulp with flour, eggs, milk, and spices before baking into pudding dark as molasses. The flavor was complex, sweet, slightly tannic, deeply autumnal. Persimmon pudding connected Christmas to harvest season, reminding families that planning made celebration possible. The dish required foraging knowledge passed between generations, knowing where best trees grew and when fruit was ready. Children often helped with gathering. Small hands reaching branches, adults couldn't. Though wild persimmons still grow across the South and Midwest, few families make this pudding anymore. It represented connection to place that modern convenience has largely erased. Head cheese was the Christmas delicacy, proving nothing from the hog went to waste, a terrine made from the head showcasing old-world preservation skills. After fall butchering, the hog's head was simmered for hours until every scrap of meat fell from bone and cooking liquid turned gelatinous from natural collagen. The meat was chopped fine, seasoned with vinegar, pepper, and sage, then packed into molds where natural gelatin set it firm. Sliced thin on Christmas morning, head cheese was eaten cold on crackers or bread, its rich, savory flavor reminding families of the animal that sustained them. The dish required skill, knowing how long to cook, how much vinegar to add, how firmly to pack molds. Families who made good head cheese took pride in their craft, sharing slices with neighbors as proof of expertise. Though it sounds unusual today, head cheese represented the summit of waste-nothing cooking, turning the least appealing parts into something genuinely prized. Fried apple pies were Christmas treats made when orchard fruit was the only sweetness families could afford. Hand-held pastries filled with spiced apples and fried until golden. Dried apples stored since autumn were rehydrated and cooked with sugar and cinnamon until they softened into thick filling. Simple pie dough was rolled thin, cut into circles, filled with spoonfuls of apple mixture, then folded and crimped shut. The pies were fried in lard until crust blistered and browned, emerging hot and fragrant. Children received them as special treats, warm, filling, burning tongues too eager to wait. Fried pies required less fuel than oven baking, practical when wood was precious. They could be made ahead and reheated, perfect for busy holiday kitchens. For families across the rural South, fried apple pies meant Christmas as clearly as any decorated tree. Though commercial versions exist today, they can't match tender crust and honest apple flavor of those made in home kitchens. Rabbit stew. Christmas dinner was the meal served in households where hunting provided what money couldn't, fresh protein for the holiday table. Wild rabbits were cleaned, jointed, and browned in bacon fat before being covered with water and simmered with onions, carrots, and potatoes until meat turned tender enough to fall from bone. The stew was thickened with flour stirred into rich broth, creating gravy clinging to every piece. For rural families, rabbit represented self-sufficiency, meat costing only time and skill to obtain. A single rabbit could be stretched to feed 6 or 8 people when combined with root-cellar vegetables. Children who grew up eating rabbit stew learned that the land provided when money didn't. The dish required no expensive cuts, no trips to the butcher, only knowledge of snares and patience. Though rabbit has largely disappeared from American tables, it once filled Christmas bowls with protein genuinely free for those who knew how to catch it. Sweet potato pone was the Christmas dessert, turning the humblest root vegetable into something approaching candy, dense, caramelized, and impossibly sweet. Raw sweet potatoes were grated fine, mixed with molasses, butter, eggs, and spices, then baked slowly until the top darkened and edges pulled from the pan. The texture was unlike any modern dessert, dense as fudge, slightly chewy, with concentrated sweetness from potatoes caramelizing during the long bake. Sweet potatoes cost almost nothing, grew abundantly in southern soil, and stored for months. For families who couldn't afford fancy desserts, pone offered genuine indulgence without expense. The dish connected to African and Caribbean foodways, carried by enslaved people who transformed New World ingredients into celebrations. Children anticipated pone all year, knowing Christmas meant this special treat would appear. Though largely forgotten now, sweet potato pone once represented the ingenuity of making celebration possible from the simplest ingredients. Chitterlings' Christmas dinner connected African-American families to traditions born from making the most of what they were given. Chitterlings, pig intestines, required hours of cleaning before boiling or frying, a labor-intensive process transforming offal into something families genuinely craved. Boiled chitterlings were simmered with onions, vinegar, and red pepper until tender, filling houses with aroma announcing the holiday to entire neighborhoods. Fried versions were cut into pieces, battered, and cooked until crispy outside while tender within. For many families, chitterlings appeared only at Christmas and New Year's, making them special occasion food. The dish required expertise, knowing how to clean properly, how long to cook when they were done. Elders passed this knowledge to younger generations, making chitterling preparation a ritual of cultural transmission. Though controversial even within Black communities, chitterlings represented survival, resourcefulness, and ability to find celebration in what others discarded. Molasses stack cake was the Christmas showpiece, proving celebration didn't require expensive ingredients. Thin layers of spiced cake stacked high with dried apple filling. Each layer was baked thin as a cookie, sturdy enough to support weight above, flavored with molasses and ginger. Between layers went filling made from dried apples cooked with molasses until they became sticky paste. The assembled cake was wrapped and left to sit for days, moisture from filling softening layers into something approaching tenderness. The result was dense, sweet, and complex, more like spiced fruit confection than modern layer cake. In Appalachian communities, stack cakes appeared at weddings and Christmas, with neighbors contributing layers to build impressive towers. The tradition required planning and community cooperation. Though largely disappeared from modern tables, stack cake once represented the pinnacle of poor man's holiday baking, proof that patience and ingenuity could create celebration from humble ingredients. Souse meat was the Christmas breakfast showcasing old-world preservation techniques, pickled pork transformed into tangy, gelatinous slices served cold on holiday morning. After fall butchering, pig feet, ears, and head meat were simmered until tender. Then meat was picked from bones and covered with cooking liquid mixed with vinegar and spices. As it cooled, natural gelatin set everything into firm loaf that could be sliced thin. The flavor was tangy and rich, texture somewhere between meat and jelly, meant to be eaten on crackers or bread. Souse required skill, knowing how much vinegar created pleasant tang without overwhelming. Families who made good souse took pride in their craft, the loaf appearing on Christmas breakfast tables alongside eggs and biscuits. The dish connected to German, English, and African American foodways, all understanding that preservation meant survival. Though unusual today, souse meat once meant Christmas morning had arrived in households where nothing went to waste. Crackling bread was Christmas morning's treat, turning rendered pork fat into something approaching luxury. Dense cornbread enriched with crispy bits of fried pork skin. When families rendered lard from freshly butchered hogs, crispy remnants left behind were called cracklings, intensely flavored nuggets adding richness to whatever they touched. Stirred into cornbread batter and baked in cast iron, they created bread simultaneously crispy and tender, with bursts of salty pork throughout. The bread required no additional fat for the pan. Cracklings provided enough grease. Served hot with butter and sorghum, crackling bread was Christmas breakfast in homes where the yearly hog provided sustenance. Children anticipated it all year, knowing special bread only appeared when cracklings were fresh from fall butchering. The dish represented waste-nothing philosophy sustaining rural families. Even fat-rendering remnants became something worth celebrating. Though largely forgotten now, crackling bread once announced that the holiday had truly begun. Buttermilk pie was the Christmas dessert made when cream and eggs were plentiful but fancy ingredients weren't. A simple custard pie with surprising depth. The filling combined buttermilk, eggs, sugar, butter, flour, and vanilla into mixture that baked into something between custard and chess pie. Buttermilk provided tang-balancing sweetness, while eggs created silky texture trembling when the pan moved. The pie cost almost nothing, using ingredients farm families always had. For households keeping cows, buttermilk was essentially free, byproduct of butter making otherwise fed to pigs. Baked in simple pastry crusts, buttermilk pie appeared at Christmas dinners throughout the South, its pale golden filling a modest but satisfying end to holiday meals. The pie kept well, tasting even better the second day when flavors melded. Though overshadowed by showier desserts, buttermilk pie represented the honest sweetness working families could always afford. Hog jowl and black-eyed peas was the Christmas and New Year's tradition promising prosperity. Smoky pork and earthy legumes simmered into a meal sustaining body and spirit. Hog jowls, pig cheeks, were cured like bacon but fattier, perfect for seasoning peas, bringing good luck. The jowls were simmered with dried black-eyed peas and onions until peas turned creamy and meat fell apart into rich shreds. Served over rice with cornbread, the dish provided complete protein and deep comfort. The tradition held that black-eyed peas represented coins, promising fortune to those who ate them as the year turned. For families who couldn't afford ham, jowls provided smoky richness at a fraction of the cost. The meal connected to African American foodways where black-eyed peas carried cultural significance beyond sustenance. Though often associated with New Year's, hog jowl and peas appeared at Christmas tables too, doubling the promise of prosperity for working families. Gingerbread was the Christmas treat filling humble homes with holiday scent. Dark, spiced cake made from molasses when sugar was too expensive. The batter combined flour, molasses, ginger, cinnamon, and whatever spices the pantry held, creating cake more brown than golden, more sturdy than delicate. Baked in cast-iron pans, gingerbread emerged fragrant and dense, meant to be eaten warm with butter or cold with coffee. Molasses provided both sweetness and depth, its bitterness balanced by warming spices. For families who couldn't afford fancy cakes, gingerbread offered genuine indulgence using ingredients costing pennies. Children associated its aroma with Christmas anticipation. The scent meant celebration was near. The cake kept well for days, improving as flavors melded. Though gingerbread remains today, the molasses dark version sustaining working families has largely disappeared, replaced by lighter, sweeter modern versions. Fried pork tenderloin was the Christmas dinner appearing when families butchered their own hogs, the prized cut reserved for the holiday table. Unlike commercial pork, farm-raised hogs produced tenderloins with actual fat and flavor. The tenderloin was sliced into medallions, pounded thin, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried in lard until golden and crispy outside while staying juicy within. Served with milk gravy from pan drippings, fried tenderloin represented the finest cut from the family hog. Meat so good it needed only simple preparation. The dish appeared at Christmas because that's when fresh pork was available, butchering happening in cold weather when meat could be processed safely. For rural families, this was luxury. Tenderloin they'd raised themselves, prepared simply and served with pride. Though pork tenderloin remains available, the fried preparation has largely vanished from Christmas tables. Crackling gravy was Christmas morning indulgence, turning pork cracklings into rich, savory sauce poured over everything. After rendering lard, crispy cracklings were simmered in milk with flour until thickened into gravy flecked with fried pork bits. The gravy was poured over biscuits, potatoes, or anything needing richness. Unlike plain milk gravy, crackling gravy carried intense porkiness from rendered fat, each bite delivering bursts of crispy texture within creamy sauce. The dish cost nothing extra. Cracklings were byproduct of lard rendering. For families who just butchered hogs, crackling gravy meant celebrating abundance. Children loved finding crispy bits hidden within, while adults appreciated how pork flavor could transform simple breakfast into feast. Though rarely made today, crackling gravy once represented the height of waste-nothing cooking. Even lard-making remnants became something worth savoring. Molasses popcorn balls were Christmas treats made when candy was unaffordable, but celebration demanded something sweet. Popcorn was popped over the fire, then coated with molasses cooked to soft ball stage, sticky but not tooth-cracking hard. Working quickly before molasses cooled, families shaped handfuls into balls, hands buttered to prevent sticking. The result was crunchy, sweet, and slightly chewy. Homemade candy using ingredients every household had. Molasses provided deeper sweetness than sugar, with slight bitterness balancing corn's natural flavor. Children helped with shaping, small hands forming balls before coating hardened. The treats were wrapped in wax paper for Christmas morning, appearing in stockings or on trees as edible decorations. Though modern caramel corn exists, it can't match honest molasses flavor of these forgotten treats that once meant Christmas had arrived for families with little else. Potato candy was the Christmas confection proving even sweets could be made from scraps. Mashed potatoes transformed into creamy fondant. A cooked potato was mashed smooth, then mixed with powdered sugar until it formed pliable dough. The mixture was rolled flat, spread with peanut butter, then rolled into a log and sliced into pinwheel rounds. The result was surprisingly delicious. Creamy sweetness from potato base, rich nuttiness from peanut butter, all costing almost nothing. Children loved helping roll and slice, seeing humble potatoes become store-bought treats. The candy required no cooking beyond the initial potato. Each family had variations. Some added vanilla, others different nut butters. Potato candy appeared at Christmas because that's when extra effort went into creating sweetness. This candy represented genuine ingenuity, making celebration possible from ingredients already in the kitchen. Rum balls rolled in cocoa were the kind of Christmas candy that adults claimed were for the grown folks, even though every child tried sneaking one when no one was looking. They were made from crushed vanilla wafers, cocoa, nuts if you had them, and whatever holiday flavoring the family kept tucked away for special occasions. The mixture turned into a soft dough that stuck to your palms, and shaping it into little balls was half the fun. Rolling them in cocoa made them look fancier than they really were, and families kept them stored in tins that rattled every time someone lifted the lid to just check. Their flavor deepened as they sat, turning richer and stronger with every passing day until Christmas morning finally arrived. No one makes them much anymore because store-bought candies drowned out homemade traditions, but for older generations, rum balls still taste like grown-up Christmas in a single bite. Nesselrode pudding brought Russian elegance to American Christmas tables during the Gilded Age. This frozen dessert combined chestnut puree with candied fruits, maraschino cherries, and whipped cream, all enriched with egg custard and a generous pour of maraschino liqueur. The mixture was frozen in decorative molds, then unmolded to reveal elaborate shapes that gleamed on silver platters. Named for a Russian diplomat, the pudding represented cosmopolitan sophistication that wealthy families aspired to display. The chestnut flavor was unlike anything else on the holiday table, earthy and sweet in equal measure. Making it required sourcing chestnuts, candying fruits, and mastering the temperamental frozen custard technique. Families served thin slices, the richness demanding restraint. The pudding disappeared as its ingredients became exotic and its preparation too demanding for modern schedules. Nesselrode pudding was Christmas elegance frozen into unforgettable form. Butterscotch pie was the kind of dessert that made people stop mid-conversation when it was carried to the table, its glossy meringue peaks and golden filling catching the light in a way no one could ignore. The magic started on the stovetop, where sugar and butter melted together to create a deep caramel flavor that filled the kitchen with warmth. Once the mixture thickened into a silky custard, it was poured into a flaky crust and crowned with a cloud of meringue. Families loved it because it felt luxurious without being expensive, a dessert that tasted like a special occasion even on ordinary days. During the holidays, Butterscotch pie was always one of the first things to disappear, with children fighting over the corner slices where the meringue browned just a little more. But as boxed pudding mixes and frozen pies became household staples, this stovetop masterpiece faded out. No one wanted to stand over a pot stirring carefully, watching for that perfect moment when the custard thickened. The world got busier, and the pie slipped quietly into memory. Yet anyone who tasted it fresh will tell you that nothing made with shortcuts ever came close, a lost masterpiece of sweetness and tradition. Rice pudding with raisins turned leftover rice into Christmas dessert that felt far more special than ingredients suggested. When rice remained from previous meals, thrifty cooks transformed it by baking slowly with milk, eggs, sugar, and precious raisins saved for holiday baking. The pudding emerged from the oven golden and creamy, with plump raisins scattered throughout like treasure. Cinnamon and nutmeg added warmth that made the simple dish taste festive. Families served it warm or cold, sometimes with cream for those who could afford it. Children loved the sweetness and surprise of finding raisins in each bite, never realizing they were eating kitchen economy. The dish required no special equipment, just a baking dish and patience for slow cooking. Rice pudding represented the creative bridge between everyday leftovers and holiday celebration, proving that Christmas dessert did not require expensive ingredients, only knowledge of how to transform simple things into something worth remembering. Timing the meal around family instead of the clock was one of Grandma's gentle rules, something she believed in more strongly than any recipe. If one person was running late, the carving knife stayed on the counter. If someone called to say they were on the way, she turned the oven to warm and waited. Thanksgiving, to her, was about togetherness, not punctuality. She watched the door more than she watched the time, and when finally everyone arrived, she would smile with relief before lifting the lid on the turkey. Her patience made the meal feel like a gathering instead of a schedule. Coconut ice was the cheerful little candy that looked like it came straight out of a storybook thanks to its pink and white layers. It showed up in mid-century cookbooks everywhere, especially those that loved simple recipes that stretched ingredients as far as possible. Coconut, sugar, and milk were mixed into a thick, sweet dough, pressed into a pan, and split into two halves so that one could be tinted the softest holiday pink. After it chilled, the slab was sliced into neat squares that looked like tiny edible presents. Children loved the color, adults loved the sweetness, and everyone agreed it felt special despite its humble ingredients. You do not see coconut ice much anymore, maybe because modern desserts prefer elegance over charm. But for the families who made it, one bite still brings back the gentler holidays of the 1950s and 1960s. Tipsy Parson wobbled onto Christmas tables carrying centuries of English tradition and considerable amounts of sherry. This layered trifle began with sponge cake soaked in sweet sherry until thoroughly saturated, then spread with jam and topped with rich custard and whipped cream. The alcohol permeated everything, making each spoonful warming and slightly intoxicating. Families assembled the dessert in clear glass bowls to display the beautiful layers, each stratum visible and inviting. The name came from the notion that village parsons, known for their love of sherry, might become tipsy from such indulgence. Children received versions made with fruit juice instead, preserving their innocence while adults enjoyed the spirituous original. Making Tipsy Parson required nothing more than patience and good ingredients, yet the result rivaled elaborate French desserts. The tradition faded as trifles simplified and alcohol content became controversial. Tipsy Parson deserved better than obscurity. Pumpkin chiffon pie was the lighter, softer cousin of the traditional pumpkin pie, a dessert so airy it felt like eating a sweet autumn cloud. It became popular when cooks wanted something elegant but not too heavy after a long day of holiday eating, and chiffon pies were considered the height of sophistication. Instead of the dense custard people are used to today, pumpkin chiffon pie relied on whipped egg whites folded carefully into a spiced pumpkin mixture, creating a silky filling that floated inside its crust. Families loved it because it felt special, almost fancy, even when the ingredients were simple and inexpensive. Mothers would make it the night before Thanksgiving so it had time to set, and children would sneak into the refrigerator just to poke at the trembling surface. But when canned pumpkin fillings and pre-made pies started taking over in grocery stores, chiffon pies faded fast. The delicate preparation did not fit into a world rushing toward convenience. People forgot the feeling of lifting a slice that barely weighed anything, of tasting pumpkin in a way that felt light instead of heavy. The pie disappeared, replaced by versions that were simpler but far less magical. Still, anyone who ever tasted a homemade pumpkin chiffon pie will tell you that nothing has matched its airy charm since. In a holiday built on tradition, it remains one of the sweetest losses. Bread pudding transformed stale loaves into Christmas dessert, rescuing what would otherwise become waste and turning it into celebration. Every crust, every heel, every slice gone too hard to eat was saved throughout December until Christmas Eve arrived. The dried bread was torn into chunks, soaked in whatever milk the family could afford, then mixed with eggs, sugar, and precious spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. Baked until golden in cast-iron pans handed down through generations, the pudding emerged transformed from kitchen scraps into something resembling abundance. Families drizzled molasses or made simple sauces from butter and sugar to top their portions. The texture was both tender and substantial, the sweetness balanced by honest bread flavor. Bread pudding taught children that nothing should be thrown away, that creativity could rescue the humblest ingredients. This dessert carried Christmas forward when fancy cakes and store-bought sweets were impossible dreams for struggling households. Putting walnuts in the stuffing was one of Grandma's little signatures, a small detail that turned her dish into something unmistakably hers. She would crush the walnuts by hand, just enough to give them texture without overpowering the rest of the ingredients. Then she folded them into the mixture with an ease that came from years of perfecting her craft. The moment that stuffing hit the oven, the warm, nutty smell drifted through the house, subtle but unforgettable. At the table, the walnuts added a quiet crunch that surprised people who forgot she always used them. They blended perfectly with the sage, broth, and cornbread, adding depth no boxed version could match. That handful of walnuts was more than just flavor. It was Grandma's way of marking the dish as her own, a reminder that even the smallest choices could carry a piece of memory. Apple pandowdy was the rustic cousin of all the fancier apple desserts, a dish that did not care about looks or presentation and still managed to win every heart at the table. It began with sliced apples simmered with cinnamon, butter, and a touch of brown sugar until the whole house smelled like the inside of an orchard. Instead of laying a perfect crust over the top, cooks would break pieces of dough and scatter them unevenly, letting the edges sink into the bubbling fruit as it baked. The juices caramelized around the dough, turning each little piece into something crisp, chewy, and irresistible. This was a dessert for families who valued flavor over perfection, people who understood that the best dishes are sometimes the messiest. Children loved it because it felt fun, like a dessert that broke the rules, and adults loved it because it tasted like the orchard harvest served straight from the pan. But as crisps and cobblers became more popular and easier to sell in bakeries, the pandowdy quietly slipped away. Its uneven top was not camera-ready, and its old-fashioned name did not help it survive in a modern world. Still, anyone who ever ate it fresh from the oven remembers the way it tasted like fall itself, a forgotten treasure hiding in plain sight. Honey walnut pralines were a Depression-era holdover that survived well into the mid-century because they were affordable, filling, and tasted far more extravagant than they cost. Honey simmered with sugar until it thickened. Then walnuts were stirred in until each one was coated in a glossy amber shell. When spooned onto a tray to cool, they set into chewy clusters that smelled like warm nuts and sweetness. Families made them when times were tight, and even when things improved, the flavor was so comforting that people kept the tradition alive. Their sweetness was subtle, their texture a perfect blend of soft and crisp. Today, they rarely appear outside of old handwritten recipe cards, but older generations still smile when they remember how something so simple could taste so generous. Prune cake was one of those desserts people loved long before they ever admitted it. A moist, spiced treat that showed up on countless holiday tables thanks to its deep flavor and long shelf life. Grandmothers especially swore by it, calling it their secret weapon because it never dried out and always tasted better the next day. The prunes disappeared into the batter, lending sweetness and moisture without announcing themselves too boldly, and the spices wrapped everything in a warm, comforting aroma. It was a cake that stretched ingredients wisely, perfect for large families and tight budgets. Children would roll their eyes at the thought of prunes, but one bite of that sticky sweet crumb made them believers. It was a dessert born from practicality, the kind of treat that made the most of what people had on hand. But as times changed and holiday desserts became flashier, prune cake was left behind. It did not look glamorous, it did not have fancy toppings, and it did not fit the modern obsession with picture-perfect food. So it vanished, even though anyone who ever loved it can still taste it in their memory, a quiet classic forgotten but never truly gone. Stuffed cabbage rolls appeared on Christmas tables across immigrant communities, stretching small amounts of meat into dishes that fed entire families. The technique came from Eastern European traditions, adapted to Depression realities where ground meat was a luxury used sparingly. Cabbage leaves were blanched until pliable, then wrapped around filling of rice, onion, and whatever meat scraps the family could afford. Sometimes just tablespoons stretched through an entire batch. The rolls simmered for hours in tomato sauce, the long cooking tenderizing everything and melding flavors together. By Christmas dinner, each roll became a complete package of protein, grain, and vegetable. The aroma of simmering cabbage and tomatoes filled homes, announcing to neighbors that holiday meal was being prepared. Stuffed cabbage taught the art of stretching resources without sacrificing satisfaction, connecting families to heritage while solving the problem of feeding many mouths with little money. Using a special apron saved for occasions was one of Grandma's small but sentimental traditions, something she treated with quiet care. The apron hung in the pantry all year, untouched except for holidays. When she tied it around her waist on Thanksgiving morning, it felt like the day had officially begun. The fabric was worn in places, soft from years of use, but still beautiful in the way cherished things always are. She wore it proudly as she moved through the kitchen, a symbol of celebration woven into something ordinary. It was a reminder that holidays deserved a little ceremony, even in the smallest details. Old-fashioned cream fudge was a test of patience disguised as a holiday recipe, and every seasoned cook treated it like a quiet competition with themselves. You could not rush it, cheat it, or distract yourself. You had to stand over that pot, stirring slowly as sugar and cream thickened into something rich and silky. Too hot and it would turn grainy, too cool and it would never set, which meant you needed steady hands and a careful eye. When it finally reached the perfect stage, you beat it until it lost its shine and turned into a soft, velvety mass ready to pour into a waiting pan. The fudge cooled into creamy blocks that melted on the tongue like sweet winter snow. No shortcut version ever recreated its texture, and most people stopped making it because store-bought fudge felt easier. But for anyone who remembers that slow, careful stirring, cream fudge still represents the kind of Christmas effort we rarely see today. Blancmange molded in copper forms graced Victorian Christmas tables with its pristine beauty. This milk pudding, thickened with cornstarch or Irish moss and flavored with almond extract, emerged from molds in elaborate shapes that showcased the cook's artistry. The texture was silky smooth, trembling gently when carried to the table on silver platters. Families served it with fruit sauces, raspberry, strawberry, or preserved cherries, that provided color contrast and flavor counterpoint. Making proper blancmange required attention to temperature and timing, the mixture needing precise cooking to set without becoming rubbery. Some cooks added ground almonds for authenticity. Others relied on extract alone for convenience. Children loved its mild sweetness and wobbly presentation, while adults appreciated its refined simplicity. The copper molds themselves were prized possessions, passed through generations and displayed in kitchen hutches. Blancmange faded as instant puddings promised convenience, sacrificing elegance for speed. Choufly pie was a slice of Appalachian history wrapped in a layer of sticky molasses and crumb topping, a dessert born from frugality and resourcefulness. It was called choufle because the sweet smell drew flies toward the table, and cooks had to shoo them away as the pie cooled. Families made it because molasses was cheaper and easier to store than sugar, making it the perfect holiday ingredient for households that had more hard work than money. The pie baked into a deep, gooey layer at the bottom with a crumbly cake-like topping on top, creating a texture that felt both rustic and indulgent. Children loved it because it was sweet enough to feel forbidden, and adults enjoyed it because every bite tasted like the land they came from. Over time, as refined sugar became cheap and store-bought pies took over, choufle pie disappeared from most homes. It was too regional, too old-fashioned, too simple to compete with newer holiday desserts, but the people who remember it still talk about it with a quiet pride. It was a dessert that told a story, and every slice tasted a little like history. Ham bone soup stretched a single Christmas ham into weeks of nourishment for families who could barely afford meat. When a family managed to purchase or barter for a ham during the holidays, nothing was discarded. The bone became foundation for soup that could feed everyone multiple times. The bone simmered for hours in large iron pots, releasing rich marrow and smoky flavor into broth, while dried beans softened alongside it. Root vegetables from the cellar, carrots, turnips, potatoes, joined the pot, creating a meal both hearty and affordable. Every bit of meat clinging to the bone was carefully scraped and returned to the soup. Families ladled steaming bowls of this broth throughout the week following Christmas, each serving a reminder of the holiday meal. Ham bone soup represented practical magic of Depression-era cooking, where one purchase became many meals. It was more than sustenance. It bridged holiday celebration and ordinary survival for families counting every penny. Charlotte Russe in molded glory was the showstopper dessert of Victorian Christmas celebrations. The elaborate creation featured ladyfingers lining a mold filled with Bavarian cream flavored with vanilla and often studded with candied fruit. Once chilled and unmolded, the Charlotte revealed perfect cylindrical beauty, the ladyfingers creating a delicate shell around the creamy interior. Families reserved this for Christmas dinner when company was present and impressions mattered. The preparation required planning and skill. The ladyfingers needed precise trimming, the cream needed perfect texture, and the unmolding demanded steady hands. Some versions added whipped cream rosettes or crystallized violets for additional elegance. The dessert melted slowly at room temperature, encouraging prompt service and appreciative consumption. Charlotte Russe required the kind of leisure and domestic skill that modern households rarely possess. Its disappearance marks the loss of an era when holiday desserts were genuine achievements. Peanut butter fudge bars were the candy that disappeared from holiday plates faster than anything else, mostly because children circled the dessert table like hungry little satellites. Back before fancy peanut butter cups and packaged sweets took over, these bars were the main event. You melted butter, sugar, and milk on the stove, stirred in a generous scoop of peanut butter, and watched the whole mixture turn thick and glossy. When you poured it into a pan and let it cool, it set into dense squares that tasted like the richest peanut butter imaginable. Every bite stuck to the roof of your mouth in the best way, sweet and creamy and warming. People stopped making them once candy aisles grew louder and more crowded, but these old-fashioned bars still hold a place in the memories of anyone who grew up watching a parent scrape the last bit of fudge from the pot with a wooden spoon. Date nut roll was the kind of dessert that made children hover anxiously around the kitchen, waiting for the moment it was sliced. It was not a pie or a cake, but a refrigerator candy, rolled by hand and packed with sweet dates, nuts, and just enough cookie crumbs to hold everything together. Families made it weeks before the holiday, storing it away in wax paper like treasure hidden in the back of the fridge. When you sliced it, the spirals of sticky fruit and crunchy nuts made every piece look like a tiny stained glass window, and the taste was just as memorable. It was sweet without being overwhelming, rich without being heavy, and easy to stretch for a crowd when money was tight. Making it was a labor of love, requiring time and patience that people no longer make space for. As store-bought candy boxes and pre-made sweets filled the shelves, the roll faded away. Seen as too old-fashioned or too fiddly for modern kitchens, But back then it symbolized celebration, care, and the quiet excitement of a holiday dessert pulled from a cold shelf on a chilly evening. A little forgotten maybe, but never undeserving of its place at the table. Indian pudding steamed for hours brought colonial tradition to New England Christmas tables. This dense cornmeal pudding combined Native American ingredients with English technique, creating something uniquely American. Cornmeal was cooked slowly with milk, molasses, ginger, and cinnamon until it thickened into a mass that baked low and slow for hours. The result was dark, sticky, and intensely flavored, with edges that caramelized against the baking dish. Families served it warm with cold cream or vanilla ice cream, the temperature contrast heightening sensation. The molasses provided depth that sugar could never match, mineral and earthy alongside sweet. Making Indian pudding required time modern schedules rarely allow, the long baking transforming simple ingredients through patience. Children often found it too intense, its dark color and strong flavor challenging young palates. Indian pudding connected Christmas tables to America's earliest culinary traditions. Its rarity marks a severed connection to colonial heritage. Peppermint nougat squares were the soft, chewy gems of the Christmas candy plate, the ones that stretched just slightly when you bit into them. Making them took steady heat and careful timing as sugar syrup cooked until it reached that perfect temperature. Crushed peppermint sticks were stirred in while the mixture was still warm, tinting the whole batch a soft pink and filling the kitchen with a cool winter scent. Once poured and cooled, it cut into neat squares that melted slowly on the tongue, equal parts sweet and minty. Children loved the color, adults loved the nostalgia, and the whole family appreciated how something so small could hold so much holiday cheer. They disappeared over time as nougat became a store-bought filler instead of a homemade treasure. But these old squares still represent the gentler side of Christmas candy making. Water pie was the desperate dessert that turned almost nothing into something sweet enough for Christmas dinner. When families could not afford eggs, milk, butter, or fruit, this pie emerged from sheer necessity and stubborn determination to have dessert on the holiday table. The filling was astonishingly simple. Water, sugar, flour, vanilla, and small amount of butter mixed together and poured into a pie crust. During baking, the mixture transformed into custard-like filling that was surprisingly satisfying. The pie had other names in different regions: depression pie, desperation pie, names carrying the weight of era's hardship. Children eating this pie often never knew how little it contained, only that mother had made them Christmas dessert. The crust could be made from lard and flour, ingredients even the poorest pantries usually held. Water pie represented the absolute bottom of depression experience, yet also represented triumph, love and determination, creating celebration from virtually nothing at all. Spiced rock candy on strings was one of the most magical Christmas crafts older generations remembered, because the candy literally grew before your eyes. It began with a jar of sugar syrup flavored with cinnamon, clove, or peppermint, heated until the sugar dissolved completely. A piece of string was tied around a pencil or a stick, lowered into the jar, and left in a warm corner of the kitchen. Over the next few days, crystals formed along the string, growing bigger each morning like tiny sugar icicles. Children would run to check the jars the moment they woke up, amazed that candy could appear from nothing but patience and science. Once the crystals reached the right size, the strings were pulled from the jars and left to dry, sparkling like Christmas decorations. Rock candy was a simple treat, affordable and exciting, especially in homes where store-bought candy was rare. Spiced versions were a holiday favorite because they filled the jar with warmth and fragrance long before the candy was ready. People stopped making rock candy as kitchens grew busier, but those who remember it still smile at the memory of growing their own sweets. It tasted like childhood curiosity and Christmas wonder suspended on a string. Syllabub in stemmed glasses was Christmas elegance whipped into frothy perfection. This ancient English dessert combined cream, sugar, and wine or sherry, beaten until it formed soft peaks that held their shape in delicate glasses. The mixture separated slowly, the creamy foam floating above a pool of flavored liquid that guests sipped after finishing the top. Families served syllabub at the end of Christmas dinner, the light texture providing relief after heavy courses. Making it required vigorous whisking by hand, often delegated to daughters learning domestic arts. The wine needed careful selection. Too sweet and the dessert became cloying, too dry and it lacked charm. Some versions incorporated lemon juice for brightness, cutting through the richness with citrus tang. The dessert looked ethereal in crystal glasses, catching candlelight and trembling with each movement. Syllabub disappeared as electric mixers made whipped cream commonplace and the patience for hand whisking vanished. It was celebration in a glass. Which forgotten Christmas meal would you bring back to your holiday table? Share your memories in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more recipes that time forgot.